Ah yes, the 16th and 17th century. What a time to be alive. A time filled with epic adventure, hardworking citizens, racism, enslavement, a whole lot of murder, and wow. Wow, that sounds horrible actually. Okay, but one thing these eras of time did have were tales of history told through many different genres by famous authors that are still recognized today.
One famous example being the explorer and writer John Smith and the historically controversial story involving him and the young Pocahontas. Today, we're going to compare and contrast the historical tale of Pocahontas with how it's portrayed in the 1995 movie adaptation. Before we do though, for those of you guys that don't know anything about this stuff,
in the 17th century, in what is now known as Jamestown, Virginia, our three main players are Pocahontas, John Smith, and Chief Powhatan. John Smith is a man of literary adventure. This guy is a soldier, a captain, a sailor, a prisoner, a colonist, an explorer, a leader, a captive, and a writer. Oh my god, what didn't this guy do? In 1600, he fought in the Turkish Long War and was captured and sold as a slave to one of the Turks. In order to escape, he killed his slave owner and later wrote saying that the sister of the killed slave owner fell in love with him, because you always gotta have that romance mixed into there. Because of John Smith's reputation, he was later invited to become a part of the Virginia Company and their plan to colonize Virginia for profit of gold in the name of King James I. Chief Powhatan, whose proper name is yeah, I wasn't even trying to attempt that one, was the leader of the Powhatan Confederacy, which consisted of 30 groups of Powhatan Indian tribes. And John Smith would trade goods with each other in hopes of things not getting bloody. Now that didn't work out too well, let me tell you that right now. Our main star, Matawaka, or she's commonly known as Pocahontas, is the daughter of Chief Powhatan. She's considered the peacemaker who helps build relations between the English and the Powhatan tribe in her own little mischievous ways. Psst, that's what Pocahontas means. 400 years later, from Pocahontas' birth, Disney created the movie simply titled Pocahontas in 1995, which simply tells the tale of her relationship with John Smith. In the behind-the-scenes video of this movie, they mention how this was, at the time, Disney's first attempt at doing an animated movie loosely based on real characters and events. In order to get a good grasp on how to tell this story, the team talked to historical experts of Jamestown, Virginia, and Powhatan culture to help make their movie more authentic. Speaking of authentic, they got Russell Means, an American Indian rights activist, to play the part of Chief Powhatan.
now the makers of this movie did take some creative liberties when making this film, because certain things aren't 100% clear of what happened regarding these three characters and events that play out as we watch the film. It is a good thing though that they did do some research for this movie, that way to avoid people doing something like this from happening. And so, without further ado, now let's go ahead and watch Pocahontas to see what all the fuss is about.
The film opens up with colonists of the Virginia Company saying goodbye to their loved ones and getting ready to set sail for colonization. Not too long afterwards, John Smith enters the scene and wow! He is way more attractive than how he is in real life. In this movie, he looks more like an actual adventurer rather than a writer in the other 15 occupations he just happens to have. And now that everybody's on the boat, it's time to set sail into the new world for the glory of England!
Not even 5 minutes into this film and it's already going to hell.
Now this scene depicts the Virginia Company's 4-month voyage to Virginia and their struggles along the way. In one of John Smith's books, he wrote about this voyage saying how it didn't go well because they were way too optimistic, thinking this voyage would only take about 2 months, and all they had to eat were biscuits while the president of the voyage was living it up at your local McDonald's. Speaking of the president, one thing this movie did leave out was how near the end of their voyage, the president charged John Smith with mutiny and made him a prisoner for a while. He's a very grumpy dude, and I feel like they probably most likely did this for time constraints, because I could definitely see something like that taking a while within the film.
gonna get a pile of gold, build me a big house, and if any Indian tries to stop me, I'll blast him.
And modern problems require modern solutions.
As the title of the movie slowly comes into frame, we're introduced to the Powhatan Indians in Wirracomico, which is what the natives called the land before Jamestown. Our next star player is Chief Powhatan, who comes back to the village after winning a battle. Afterwards, he wonders where his daughter Pocahontas is at. Finally, we're introduced to the woman herself, Pocahontas, as she embraces nature on top of a cliff. Hopefully not thinking of a way to immediately make this movie rated R.
All right, because I'm not coming in after you. Don't you think we're getting a little old for these games?
You suck!
After Pocahontas basically ruins her friendship, they return to the village, where she learns that she is arranged to marry Kocoum, a brave warrior of the tribe.
Another big difference between the movie and how it's actually told is that in the movie, Pocahontas isn't interested in marrying Kocoum, whereas in the actual tale, years after John Smith leaves, Pocahontas does eventually marry Kocoum.
After arguing with her father about not wanting to marry Kocoum, Pocahontas leaves the village to go seek guidance from Grandmother Willow as she sings about the river bend or whatever.
Good morning, child.
What?
Surprisingly, trees that look like your grandma don't exist. I know. Hard to believe.
Pocahontas asks Grandmother Willow what she should do about the predicament she's in regarding Kocoum and her father, Chief Powhatan. She tells her to listen to nature.
What do you see?
Clouds. Strange clouds.
Oh, look at me. I'm Pocahontas, and I apparently don't know what a boat is. Duh.
We're brought back to John Smith and his crew. They finally make it to shore and head off to check it out. I did forget to mention one thing though.
Or did I? In the movie, the Virginia Company only heads out in one boat. But in the actual reality of it, there were 3 different ships that went on sail to Virginia. I feel like they probably did this just to have a nice small cast of characters rather than just having a huge bunch of people out of nowhere, which makes sense.
The wise elder tells Chief Powhatan about the arrival of these natives and sends Kocoum along with a few others to observe them with caution. Afterwards, Radcliffe gets the boys to start digging so he can get his gold that he sings about for 3 minutes or something like that.
Also, John Smith was a lot more involved with the settlement of Jamestown and the whole digging the gold than how he was in the actual film. If anything, he was the one who was more like getting everybody to dig up the gold and basically telling them like if they don't work, they don't eat.
And after all this time, John Smith and Pocahontas finally meet and have the world's most epic staring contest.
Let me help you out of there.
Medakwe naturat.
Well, I do appreciate the fact that when they speak to each other, they can't understand each other, despite the fact not too long ago Pocahontas was speaking perfect English. But, it's a movie. What are you gonna do?
Pocahontas was speaking Eastern Algonquin, which is the language of the Powhatan tribe. Matanakwe Naturath basically means, I don't understand you. Or in layman's terms, new phone, who dis?
We'll call on our brothers to help us fight. These white men are dangerous.
Through the power of love, Pocahontas and John Smith can finally understand each other. Meanwhile, the colonists and the natives duke it out, ending in the colonists' favor, because, well, they have guns, so obviously they would win. When we cut back to the 2 lovers, Pocahontas explains, in Disney fashion of course, how ignorant John Smith and his crew are for wanting to take things that aren't their own.
Wait a minute. That rock looks really familiar. Pocahontas is the sequel to The Lion King.
Indians, Wiggins, why do you think those insolent heathens attacked us?
Because we invaded their land and cut down their trees and dug up their earth.
He knows too much.
Finally, John Smith and Pocahontas kiss.
I gotta say though, all this comparing and contrasting has made me think about how old were John Smith and Pocahontas really? Because in the movie, they look about, they're like their mid-20s. So I wonder how old they actually were.
Okay, so yeah, John Smith was about 26 during the events of this story, and his character looks about the same age. Now let's see, I wonder about Pocahontas. I bet she's about the same. Oh no.
Yeah, so this is one of the biggest differences between the movie and how it actually happened. in reality, there was no romantic interest between John Smith and Pocahontas. Pocahontas was just some little cute girl who would occasionally visit John Smith every once in a while, accompanied by other natives.
Kocoum doesn't appreciate John Smith kissing his girl, so he attacks. Unfortunately for Kocoum, Thomas kills him.
Okay, so two things. First off, Kocoum didn't die this early in reality. In reality, Kocoum, many years later, married Pocahontas, and then they had a kid, and then he got captured by some Englishmen, and then later died by said Englishmen. Now, with Thomas, our boy Thomas over here, in the movie, he's just your regular average colonist who's kind of all goofy and weird and whatever. But in reality, he is the son of Pocahontas, and not John Smith, but John Rolfe, who is a character we will talk about a little bit later. So I feel like they had Thomas in here as kind of a little Easter egg reference in this movie.
And so, John Smith is captured by the Powhatan tribe for the death of Kocoum, which is another thing that didn't actually happen. In reality, he was captured because he was just lurking around the land, and the Powhatan tribe were very suspicious of him. Thomas tells everyone that John Smith has been captured by the Powhatan Indians, and they get ready to fight them. Sure. And this scene right here is one of the biggest differences between the movie and how it really happened.
So in the movie, this scene was more of a execution because of the death of Kocoum. But in reality, it's been said that this scene was more of a ceremony to welcome and admire John Smith as a leader of the colonists. And with Pocahontas, it's not really clear whether she really tried to save him, or if it was part of the ritual, or if she was even there to begin with, because in reality she was 12 and they probably didn't want to have kids there for such brutal rituals.
Chief Powhatan decides not to kill John Smith and lets him off the hook. After getting shot, John Smith and the Virginian Company leave so he can get treated.
This right here is another big difference between the movie and how it actually happened. In reality, John Smith was just chilling out with the crew at the schoolyard and out of nowhere got blasted by gunpowder, and so then they left.
And so, Pocahontas and John Smith say their goodbyes, and the Virginian Company leaves Jamestown. The end.
And so that's it. Now, regarding John Rolfe, he's a character that Pocahontas eventually meets later on in her life after she's captured by Englishmen and then eventually changes faith into Christianity. But in this movie, he's not talked about because he's actually in the sequel, Pocahontas 2. But unfortunately, that movie sucks. So we won't be talking about it. And so, I hope you guys enjoyed and had a great time, and I'll see you later.